Alright, after my glyph guide and the ensuing price hike, a lot of you have asked about gathering builds, so we're gonna cover every single profession and optimize gear, traits and skills. When it comes to gathering, I usually prefer power-based builds, as they can deal with enemies relatively quickly should we get stuck in combat. A few builds will deviate from this however, but that's because their toolkit will lend itself to a different playstyle. For power builds, I'm using Commander's gear with Fireworks runes, which provides me with enough power and precision to deal with enemies efficiently and add toughness and concentration to make the gathering experience smoother. If you don't own legendary gear, do not spend resources making this specific set. Whatever set you have equipped will do, you just might have to refresh quickness a bit faster. And if you do want to invest in a specific set, you might want to consider Diviner's gear, which can also be used in group content. For condition-based builds, this means we're going with Celestial gear and Firebrand runes. But once again, don't make a set if you don't own one. Ritualist gear can be used in group content and would make for a better stat combo. You'll notice that not all professions are equal when it comes to open world gameplay, or gathering to be more specific. But even when they don't have the best toolkit, we can still make some clever use of game mechanics. We can stack up on Jadebot protocols and take some damage to activate all boons, which means Necromancers and Revenants can activate an ability that costs them health, and all other classes can take some strategic falling damage when dismounting. Now, if you don't like stacking up protocols, then the Relic of the Cavalier will be a nice alternative. This relic provides a few boons, amongst which quickness, whenever you use your Mount's Engage ability. And if you own a Skyscale, you'll get a stack of these every time the fire field ticks. Finally, all of the builds that do not have an easy way of maintaining quickness can cover the downtime by consuming cups of light roasted coffee, which will grant you a couple of seconds of quickness when dismounting. Now, let's get to the actual builds and start with Warrior. Berserkers can provide permanent quickness, but they require a target. And if the target dies too quickly, they won't even have that much quickness anyway. So instead, I prefer using a variant of the Staff Spellbreaker I published a couple of weeks ago. All we're gonna do is swap the Grandmaster arms trait to dual wielding and equip a dagger and axe in our second set. This trait increases our attack speed by 20% whenever we're holding a main hand weapon in our offhand, and also affects the speed of our gathering tools. That means we'll be gathering slightly slower than if we had quickness, but there's no extra buttons to press. And if a node is guarded by an enemy, just use any of your weapon skills to deal with them, and hitting them with Axe 4 will even provide some quickness. Our utilities are focused by dropping combat fast by being able to cleanse conditions, covering some distance with Bull's Charge, and providing some quickness with Frenzy. Comparatively, Guardians have it easy, as Firebrand's toolkit is based around providing quickness and they inflict burning, which is almost as efficient as using a power build. So this will be one of the rare occasions where I'm using Celestial gear with Firebrand runes. The one utility I want to talk about is Advance, which grants Aegis. If you block an attack with Aegis, you won't be put in combat. And we'll already have Aegis whenever we dismount. So if we take a hit from an enemy and notice we're nowhere near being done gathering, we can use Advance so that we can still try mounting up afterwards. Revenants have it easy as well, probably the easiest out of all professions, since Heralds provide quickness by maintaining at least 6 pips of energy upkeep. In the footage, I'm using Shiro and Glint, just because I'm used to those, but you could just as easily replace Shiro with Ventari if you can't stand the sound of Impossible Odds, or any of the other legends, but those might put you in combat. I do prefer using a greatsword over dual swords for its dash ability, and the one trait I'm always equipping is Rising Momentum, which increases movement speed for every point of upkeep in use. An alternative would be the dual shortbow Herald I published a while ago, but I wanted to showcase something slightly more optimal for gathering. Next up are the medium armor professions, which have the most variety when it comes to builds, and we're gonna cover them all. Or at least the ones I frequently use, and let's start with Rangers, who actually don't have the easiest time maintaining permanent quickness out of combat. But that doesn't have to be an issue. If you run enough boon duration, then Quickening Zephyr combined with the cups of light roasted coffee should provide near permanent quickness. When it comes to the builds themselves, I'd recommend either Soul Beast or Untamed. The former has a bit more mobility when merging with an Eagle, as one of the abilities will let us dash extremely long distances, while the latter can unleash their pets while gathering. I prefer the Untamed out of the two, but it's basically a coin toss. Next is Thief, and they can actually choose between all 3 elite specs. Spectres can easily maintain quickness by combining a Relic of the Chronomancer with Wells, and Spectres are the other spec I would recommend using Celestial or Ritualist gear. The only thing I changed for all 3 of the Thief builds is using a shortbow with Sigils of Concentration for the extra boon duration and Sigil of Celerity which grants quickness when interrupting an enemy. 2 of our wells as well as shortbow 4 can do this, which means we can gather while potentially taking care of a nearby enemy, all the while stacking up quickness. The difference between the Daredevil and Deadeye builds is playstyle. Deadeyes can permanently stealth by dodging with a rifle thanks to the Silent Scope trait, while still keeping haste for some quickness and Shadow Step for mobility. The traits we pick mean that we want to avoid combat at all costs though, but in return we get permanent super speed by combining Shadow Arts with a relic of the Unseen Invasion, and we won't be affected by movement impairing conditions as long as we have swiftness. Daredevils on the other hand are all about speed. We have less access to stealth, but in most cases, hiding shadows and blinding powder will do the trick. We could swap out the latter with Shadow Refuge, which provides a longer duration stealth and won't put us in combat, but has a much longer cooldown. Whenever we are put in combat, we can either choose to deal with an enemy by swapping to staff, or simply put ridiculous amounts of distance between us with Shortbow 5 or Dodge and Shadow Step. Our final medium armor wearer is the Engineer, or more specifically the Scrapper. I previously covered a build that combines the relic of the Chronomancer with wells for permanent quickness and super speed. This is an incredibly easy build and I highly recommend checking out the guide in the pinned comment. For this video however, we're gonna go over the build I showcased in my glyph guide. It requires a far more active playstyle and knowledge of abilities, but is probably the fastest gathering build out there. Much like our Deadeye, we won't care about combat. All of our traits are about maintaining quickness, super speed, vigor and improving our utility skills. The reason we want vigor is because every time we will dodge, our elite skills cooldown is gonna get reduced by 3 seconds. And instead of relying on wells to generate quickness, we're gonna use blast and leap finishers inside combo fields. The one you'll see me use the most is the function gyro with shield 4 and sword 3. The gyro itself is a blast finisher that provides a lightning field, and sword 3 grants quickness on top of being a leap finisher. Whenever sword 3 is on cooldown or we need to cover a larger distance, we can use rocket boots instead. The potential issue with this combo is that it can put us in combat whenever there are enemies nearby. And whenever that's the case, we want to use medkit 3 and 5 instead. Medkit 5 is a blast finisher that does not target enemies, and 3 will provide a water field. Stealth Gyro is yet another combo field, and also provides stealth, and elixirs U and S are both stun breaks, while U will grant quickness, stability and vigor on top, and S will make us untargetable while still allowing us to gather. With all of that, we risk forgetting about the tool belt skills, which will further enhance this build. F1 and 2 will provide super speed, and F4 provides another 6 seconds of stealth. When playing the build, you should have permanent super speed. And if you own a Choya Piñata tonic, which you can get from the Amnoon meta, or an Executioner's Axe toy, you can actually move around quicker with those than most mounts as long as you have both quickness and super speed. That brings us to the light armor professions. Reapers and Chronomancers have it easy, as both can equip a relic of the Chronomancer and slot in as many wells as their toolbars can fit. With Chrono, we'll use a regular DPS build, which means we can use our wells and a Phantasm to deal with nearby enemies while we gather. Reapers can pretty much do the same, but they do have an extra trick up their sleeves. I highly recommend stacking up Jadebot protocols because all of these sword abilities' second activation sacrifice some health, which will activate all of the Jadebot buffs. This means we can use sword 3 to both traverse long distances and stack up on quickness at the same time. Our final profession is the Elementalist, who sadly doesn't really have any tools to make gathering easier. But that doesn't mean we can't use any of the other tricks we already learned. I usually play a Fresh Air Tempest in the open world, which I already covered in another guide. In the footage, you'll see me taking fall damage every time I dismount to activate the Jadebot protocols, or use my Mount's Engage ability on an enemy to activate Relic of the Cavalier. That way, I can still maintain permanent quickness both inside and outside of combat, so I can gather faster. And that's about everything there is to know. If you wonder why I'm using a specific gathering tool skin or glyph, go check out the guides in the pinned comment. And if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a member. I swear no one will look at you funny for joining as an OnlyFan.